very special live episode today on this very important occasion in Venezuelan modern history, which is, of course, Inauguration Day for President Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela for his third term. Obviously, Venezuela has been in the news quite a bit these last few days, but unfortunately, much of that coverage has been, as is usually the case when it comes to Venezuela, biased, unfavorable towards the government, and of course, in some cases, outright dishonest. And we had a particularly bad episode of that in this recent history that's taking place before our eyes here in Venezuela. I am, of course, talking about this fake news that Maria Corina Machado was allegedly detained when she wasn't, and trying to cause scandal. We're going to get into detail of that, of course. But the first thing I wanted to do is actually throw it over to the Venezuelanalysis staff here. I am, of course, José Luis Granado Ceja, your host, and I'm joined by Ricardo Vaz, Cira Pascual Marquina, and Andreina Chavez, who are based in Venezuela, based in Caracas, and have been part of everything that's been happening since the election day, and obviously in this last week where we've seen a lot of activity, particularly in the streets. And I wanted to start there. I think most people, if they read mainstream coverage of what's happening today in Venezuela, they would have a very different idea of what's going on. You have this image cast about the country as a result of years of propaganda efforts as an authoritarian state and violently repressive, and the dictator in Venezuela, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, during this period, what we saw from the mainstream media, the bourgeois media, when it comes to Venezuela, has been this effort to depict this as an illegal, unconstitutional usurpation of power by Nicolás Maduro. But the part that I really wanted to start with you is, this notion that, the capital was heavily militarized and nobody was out on the streets because of the fear, and that, the only way he was only going to be able to carry out his inauguration was through mass repression and things like that. So you're on the ground. You've been there in the capital, in Caracas. I think we'll start with you, Cira. If you could tell us a little bit of your impressions of what was the mood in Venezuela. There was a lot of unease, and I will admit that I was somewhat nervous about what could potentially happen. It's hard to predict what U.S. imperialism and its allies in Venezuela are capable of doing, that potentially things could go really bad. There was even rumors of a potential coup attempt. As we know, there was also people who were detained, alleged to be involved with mercenary activities. So nonetheless, what we saw was a mostly normal day, but we want to hear from you, Cira. What's the mood on the ground in Venezuela today on Inauguration Day, January 10th?
Today has been a very peaceful day. Actually, I think that what characterized the day is that there were massive Chavista marches in different places in Caracas. That would be kind of like the highlight of the day. I was in one of the marches, and basically it was a very wonderful day of the people coming together, of Chavistas and the people of Venezuela, kind of like joining together after this long period, of course, of threats, of continuous threats that will continue after today. But what I would say is that not only today, but yesterday already were days that were characterized by a great deal of participation on the streets, a great deal of joy, a great deal of hope too, looking towards the following year. So I think that would be the main thing. Of course, there is this whole thing about the fake news that Maria Corina Machado has generated. It actually has become a little bit of a joke amongst the left and amongst the Chavismo, but it is true that it is dangerous because the mainstream media has used it to try to paint the government once again as an authoritarian government. This happened yesterday. There was a very, very small opposition march, and she alleged that she basically had been detained. There were probably 100 phones on her all the time, focused on her all the time. So we know for a fact that if something had happened, somebody would have recorded it. And there's absolutely no evidence that this happened. So while this may be indeed a joke amongst the Chavistas, that she's making this fake news, it is something that also should concern us, because they are going to continue to make fake news about the Bolivarian process and about what we are doing here, about this project that aims to transform Venezuelan society.
Now, I was going to throw it over here to Andreina and hear your thoughts as well. I know that you've been out on the streets as well. Have you had a chance to talk with Venezuelans, ordinary Venezuelans who also decided to take to the streets? I think one of the things that we also saw was severely underreported was the massive Chavista mobilization that Sierra was talking about as well. Did you talk with people? What were they saying about the sense of what this occasion meant for them? Were they nervous about destabilization efforts? You know, what compelled them to take to the streets and participate in these mass activities on this occasion?
Hi, Jose Luis. So first, I have to say that as a Venezuelan, I feel like very disappointed that I cannot entertain people by telling them some horrible story about war or devastation in Venezuela, which is the way mainstream media was portraying this day. They were portraying this day as if a war was about to unleash in Venezuela, like something horrible was going to happen today. Like in no way Maduro was going to be able to assume the presidential mandate. So I always say people like, yeah, I feel responsible. I feel like I'm not entertained in the war with all of these claims that mainstream media makes. So yeah, I was actually in the streets all of these days, and what I saw mainly yesterday and today was, like Sira was saying, like really peaceful. People were just minding their own business. Of course, we saw the Chavista marches and mobilizations. And again, they were just like really peaceful mobilizations. Like people were just singing, marching, dancing, singing consignas. I have some friends that worked in these marches, and they were like, yeah, I mean, they were really nice. Nothing really big happened. We were just happy that we didn't have to confront any difficult situations in the streets. We were just happy that we were able to do our march and sing our songs and just be happy and then go home. And that's basically what happened. People just went out, they mobilized, and they went home after that. So I'm very happy about that too, because of course I was also a little scared that maybe something could happen. But then yesterday when we saw the opposition mobilization, we realized that, yeah, there's no way. They don't have the people, they don't have the means, they don't have people simply don't trust them or don't believe in them, and they don't go out to mobilize the way they want to. So I think the opposition has pretty much failed in any way to mobilize their supporters. And we have to remember that Maria Corina has lied before about these type of things. Like yesterday, she lied about being detained and all of that. But before, in years before, I do remember Maria Corina faking, getting shocked by people, like getting, I don't know, like in some sort of problem with Chavista people, and it was all a lie, and we all find out about it later. So it's not the first time that Maria Corina fabricates these type of scenarios in which she then portrays herself as a victim. So it's not new for Venezuelans to see her in this kind of role. Also, I just wanted to say that I also have a lot of friends and family outside of Venezuela, and they write to me all the time, like, what is happening? Mainstream media is saying that mercenaries are about to invade, that something is going to happen, something big. And I was like, no, everything here is so peaceful. There is no way for Edmundo Gonzalez to actually return to Venezuela. I don't believe that we are out of danger. I do think that because they are the right wing and they have the support of the US, the United States, they have the support of imperialism, we know that they're going to do something in the future. They're not going to just stay quiet. They're going to try to harm Venezuela in any way. But something that I've been thinking these past few days is like, we've been through so much these past few years. We've been hurting so much. We've been through sanctions, economic aggression, migration. I feel like even if it's painful, I feel like we're ready. Like we're prepared to take on anything that imperialism think they can throw at us. I think we can defend ourselves. We can resist anything now. And I just think that we are a whole different people than we were a couple of years ago. Like we're people now who just know how to resist and know how to fight back.
Right, and before I throw it over to you, Ricardo, actually something you said, Andreina, had me thinking. I saw this tweet from friend of Venezuelanalysis, Lubrio, and one of the things that he highlighted was, in fact, the fact that yesterday we had two competing marches. One that was with the opposition, another that was with the pro-government forces, the Chavismo. And in fact, they were mere meters away from each other at one point in sort of the opposition stronghold of Chacao. Chacao is a middle class, upper middle class neighborhood in Caracas. For those of you who are not familiar, it's often where the opposition holds its demonstrations, and everything was peaceful. There was no incident. And he mentioned that I thought was actually really worth highlighting, which is that this is the way that normally politics is conducted in a country. There normally isn't this kind of tension and mercenaries and coup plots and is somebody going to sneak their way across the border, have we seen historically. What we had were two competing political visions expressing themselves, as is guaranteed by the Venezuelan constitution, taking to the streets and stating their opinion, right? And without incident, without violence. And so I want to throw it to you, Ricardo, of your sense of what things were like in Venezuela on these days, not just today, but the days beforehand. I know about this kind of sense of unease, and your evaluation of, could this be a turning point? Could this be where we finally have some kind of normality, or should we expect things to go as they historically have, which is the next plot? We're just waiting for the next thing, the shoe to drop when it comes to the Venezuelan opposition.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to a point where something being uneventful is surprising to us. But yeah, I mean, as Luigino, who is a dear friend of ours, says, that's the way it's supposed to be. And I was worried for a time. The thing is that the opposition called for 4 different concentrations. And they do this, I called it the Guaido technique, where they take these photographs at ground level so you cannot really see where the crowd ends. And then they told everyone to go to Chacao, to the Chacao meeting point. And it was, a street that crossed the path in which the Chavista march would eventually come from. And I was thinking, we all remember these scenes from the 2002 coup of the marches crossing and it being an opportunity for some kind of false flag operation or to sow violence. And basically the opposition needed to do something. So what could it do? Could it try and create some sort of incident and so on? And I was worried. I remember we were talking at the time, are they going to cross? I mean, is it serious? And I was looking at the opposition pictures, trying to picture where they were and so on, until I saw a drone picture and they could only fill half a block, and they were still, half a block and a half away before they could even come close to the Chavista march. And that's why I was wondering, why isn't police cordoning off or dispersing them? The fact that, they were so far away that there was no real danger. So I think the upshot of all this is that, the opposition once again got kind of trapped in its own narrative, because after the election, we talked about this. It gradually lost support, and then Edmundo went abroad, and then January 10 was on the calendar, and they needed to manufacture something, and so Edmundo went on this international tour, and Maria Corina was going to come back from hiding and so on. And they needed to manufacture something, and then the crowds were so underwhelming that I don't know if this was someone's idea or, maybe they just lost contact with Maria Corina Machado for 2 minutes and someone decided to make up this story. But in the end, it just fell apart. And what surprises me the most is that Maria Corina had 24 hours to come up with a useful excuse and somehow made it worse than it was before. So it doesn't make any sense. Like the governor or any kind of security apparatus would arrest her or kidnap her, quote unquote, and then release her in exchange for her recording a video saying she wasn't kidnapped. It doesn't stand to the government's benefit. Whereas, for the opposition, they tried as best they could, and it was kind of a prime example of how dishonest the corporate media can be. This story was debunked in less than an hour. We were talking because you were writing the story that we published yesterday, and immediately there were reports saying this is not true, do not trust it. Official sources say this is not true, and then less than an hour later we had this video of Maria Corina saying I'm fine, I'm safe, but that didn't stop the media establishment from running with the story and then making up some excuses that she was released hours later. They kept the headlines, which is what most people will read, to try and sow this narrative. Some of them today were still writing as though Maria Corina was under arrest or something. So it was a case of the opposition trying to do something, and then they got to the end of the day and say, we're going to send instructions for tomorrow, and then tomorrow is today. Tomorrow came and went, and basically nothing happened. We just had Edmundo say, I'll return as soon as the conditions are met. I think we'll go back to him. And the other thing, just to wrap up and throw it back to you, what Cira and Andreina were saying about, of course the threats are not over, and regime change is kind of a permanent objective in Washington. And so there are two things. I mean, one was the immediate, let's say, knee-jerk response today from Washington and its disgraceful allies in the European Union and the United Kingdom and Canada, and then all the question marks for Trump when he takes office 10 days from today.
Absolutely, yeah. So I want to put something here on the screen. You made mention of this, and I want to share with those of you who are joining us right now. And of course, it's on our social media channel, so feel free to check that out. But this is, I think, the video you're talking about, Ricardo, where you can see this drone shot, and that's the size of the crowd. That's as big as it got, and that is the crowd that Maria Corina Machado addressed. So to remind people, so she's obviously the prominent opposition figure right now. You can go to our website to read about her history, but she's a woman who has always supported every undemocratic regime change effort that has been tried when it comes to Venezuela. I remember when I first came across is when she went to go meet with George W. Bush. So that's how long she's been plotting against the Bolivarian Revolution. But she obviously played a major role in this last election. You know, Edmundo Gonzalez is not really a politician. He's not really anybody. He's an old diplomat. He barely campaigned. But ultimately, she was the face of the opposition here. It's widely understood that Edmundo Gonzalez was the standing candidate for Maria Corina Machado. And obviously, after the election, you know, they cried fraud. They tried to pretend that that Edmundo Gonzalez had won, denying the authority of the Venezuelan institutions, which obviously he had affirmed. And in fact, they even had ample opportunity to present their case. They decided not to participate in all of that. So kind of really affecting their own argument there. Their case has obviously been made in the international media. And for a while there, she was consistently participating in these demonstrations. And, you know, we did some coverage, obviously, in the days following the July 28th election, you know, where there was a significant mobilization and a very violent protests as well. There were just scary times there. But, you know, we saw the mobilization of the state forces and kind of controlled that situation. And then she went into hiding. She's basically been missing for months now. And this moment, this scene that you're seeing here, that's where she decided to reemerge. And it's large and it's very, very dim. And before people accuse me of presenting unfair information, this video here actually shows them being zoomed in. And you can see this is where she addressed. And of course, very, very small crowd. And I think all that, if you were to ask me, has a lot to do with the fact that we saw things play out the way that they did today. And many of you have also alluded to this, which is basically that, you know, the turnout was so underwhelming that I think their own confidence to try anything was really shaken. And they realized that the strategy that they maybe had conceived of was not going to play out the way that it was. I also wanted to bring this up here on the screen because I think often this is also an ignored element, right? The fact that pretend as if Chavismo doesn't exist, as if there isn't supporters, and if they hadn't mobilized. And you can see these images here from Manolo dos Santos, who was also in Venezuela for these events, of Chavismo in the streets. And of course, none of that ever gets reported, right? Everything is repeated from the opposition's talking points. I found it extraordinary to read in so much of the mainstream media coverage. You know, they pick up her evaluation of the demonstration, saying that there were hundreds of thousands of people on the street. You know, of course there wasn't, right? And I think it's really important to stress that because this is a political force that has consistently been dishonest, you know, that has not been an honest broker when it comes to politics in the country. They claim one thing and another thing is happening. And I really want to highlight this precisely because of the situation around this fake detention that never actually happened. And I want to put our story up here on the screen here. And as Ricardo mentioned, we were working together on this, a little bit of the how the sausage factory works here for our viewers who are joining in right now. Ricardo and I were in touch all day, you know, talking back and forth about what was going on in the streets, what should we focus on in our coverage. And obviously this story comes out, but being the responsible journalists that we are, we took a pause and we're like, hang on, we're not going to run with a headline, oh, Maria Corina Machado's team has denounced that she's been arbitrarily detained. Let's wait for information. And of course, as you said, this video comes out. And before I turn it over to you, one final point that I wanted to make which is that, so now the narrative has been that, as you said, Ricardo, that this was all staged, right? That she was forced to record this video and that it was kind of like a proof of life type of video, and that was the only reason they let it go. Now, there's a lot of things that make it very difficult to believe. You know, like I said, these are not honest people in many, many, many regards, but the one thing that I think really jumps out at me, and I wanted to bring this up here, which is that just recently, right, former candidate Edmundo Gonzalez signed a letter acknowledging that Venezuela's institutions affirmed that Maduro won the election and declared him the winner. And then later on says, no, I was forced. I didn't actually mean to write that. That was what I had to do to get out. And then evidence to the contrary comes out, right? A photo of them kind of calmly discussing, facilitating the safe conduct. I bring that up only as an example, a very recent one, of how actors within the Venezuelan opposition will outright lie. And then, the evidence comes out that proves that they were the ones being dishonest. So I wanted to, anybody can jump in here. Maybe we'll go with Ciro. We haven't heard from you in a minute. Around the thinking behind the strategy. I've seen some talk online that the effort was to try to do something about that, the fact that there was such low turnout, that so few people decided to go out into the streets to protest the inauguration of Nicolás Maduro, and they thought that maybe by making this alert, that would mobilize people. What is your evaluation of this colossal mistake made by the Venezuelan opposition that was eventually disproven to be that she wasn't detained at all? Sarah.
Well, it's a colossal mistake if you think that it's not going to have some feedback in the mainstream media. But as we said before, there's still mainstream media that are saying it. And I think they are going to let it peter down. Will they really say that it didn't happen as we know it didn't happen? I doubt it. I think that they are going to kind of like let it die down and it'll stay in people's subconsciousness that, or like in people's memory, that this horrible thing happened to this person, to this woman, Maria Corina Machado. So I'm not so sure that in terms of their objectives, I'm not so sure that they were wrong. Unfortunately, I think that they may be seeding something there. Now, it is true, however, that we can have no doubt that they expected that the response on the ground in Venezuela would be different. I think that when they went into the show, they probably expected that, like people would, like thousands and thousands of people would pour into the street today because they were so outraged by what supposedly happened yesterday. And that didn't happen. So there's kind of like two levels, to kind of like spaces where fake news like this can operate. I remember yesterday actually when I was coming back home at around 10 p.m. or so a lot after the whole thing had clearly become most of us knew, most Venezuelans knew that it was a fake. Somebody coming up in the elevator told me, "Oh, do you know that Maria Corina Machado was shot?" So the story actually not only stayed in that level, it actually had escalated. And I imagine that was one of the objectives. Now, most people were more in touch with real news, with what's really happening. And people in Venezuela, and most people in Venezuela, both Chavistas and opposition, I'm sure, know that it was all a montage. But when we look at the situation internationally, which is of great concern to us, nationally too, because we cannot be sure that I would say we can be sure that they are going to attempt everything by all means, both here and internationally. But when we look at the situation internationally with this fake news, I think it remains of concern to us.
Andrina, I wanted to ask you along the same lines. What do you, building on what Sira just said here, what do you think we can expect? I think it's true. There's that famous saying, right? The lies will travel around the world before the truth has barely put its shoes on, right? So is this part of something that is going to continue down the road? Is this part of a longer term strategy to continue to damage the image of Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution and the Maduro government moving forward, given the fact that their effort to stop his inauguration clearly did not succeed?
So I completely agree with Sira's analysis that they knew that they didn't have the power to mobilize people, so they staged the scenario of detaining Maria Corina, so people will get angry and will go out to the streets, and that didn't happen. And I was thinking about it yesterday when events were unfolding, and I was like, I completely understand. I mean, these are people who called for violent protests the day after the election on July 29, July 30, and they left people completely alone on the streets. Uh, we have Edmundo Gonzalez, someone who proclaims that he won the election, and he leaves to Spain. He goes voluntarily to Spain, and he signs an agreement with the government saying that he recognizes that the judicial authorities have upheld Maduro's victory, and he went voluntarily to Spain. So what kind of supporters will go out to the street to defend a leader that does not do the same for them? Maria Corina likes to call people to go to the street. She likes to incite violence, but then she goes into hiding. And then the one who is the candidate, the actual presidential candidate, goes away, goes to another country. So of course people are not going to go to the street to defend these leaders that do not do the same for them. So, but I do think that there is something that they did achieve, like Sira was saying, to create this narrative in mainstream media that the government is chasing Maria Corina, that they are going to arrest her anytime. We know that's not going to happen. I mean, we saw it with Juan Guaido. We were always asking ourselves, like, why don't they detain Juan Guaido? I mean, he's obviously, there are valid reasons to detain Juan Guaido. There are more than valid reasons to detain Maria Corina Machado. We have to remember that not only she has participated in every single coup against the Venezuelan government, both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, she has also called for military intervention in Venezuela. She has called and supported all economic sanctions against Venezuela, so there are more than valid reasons to detain her. But we know that the Venezuelan government is not going to do that, because we know that doing that, it will give like more ammunition to the mainstream media to continue to peddle this narrative that we are in a dictatorship, and we know all of the lies that mainstream media usually says about Venezuela. So they're not going to do that. But Maria Corina needs to create the impression that she's being constantly harassed, that she's being constantly persecuted, that they want to detain her at the first sight of her. And we know that's not going to happen. But she did achieve with this lie, with this little stage scenario that she made, she did achieve to give mainstream media a little bit of ammunition so they can peddle the story that Maria Corina is this poor harassed woman who is in hiding or whatever. We know that's not true. We know that most likely, if Maria Corina wanted to, she could leave Venezuela and the Venezuelan government will let her go. They will just let her go. It is better for them, for her to just go to the US, to go to Madrid, to go to any place else. So we know that's not true. But I do think that what they're going to do is that they're going to milk this story about her detention until they don't have any more, until they find something else they can do. We don't know what that is. I still believe that once Trump inaugurates his presidential mandate on January 20, I do believe that the opposition is going to, from that moment on, see what kind of coup strategy they can follow and what the Trump government is going to support or not. So I think we have a lot to see still from these right-wing forces and their imperialist allies.
So there you have it, right? I mean, you can follow our coverage on our social media, on our website, of course. We were very quick on this. Again, I was, in constant communication with Ricardo to make sure that we were fast on getting this information out there and to tell the real version of events here. And in fact, if you look at the details, right, it all can be corroborated. None of this that we reported was speculation, right? People who are with her. And the one thing that I find really extraordinary, you made this point, Ricardo, was that, I'd never seen so many cameras on one single individual, and somehow this was never caught. But before we move on, I did want to point one final thing out, which is that here we mentioned the Human Rights Deputy Director for the Americas, Human Rights Watch Deputy Director for the Americas, Juan Papier, even said that they had confirmed his arrest and then, to save face, claimed free. Very much what the mainstream media also said. Oh yeah, there was a detention, but then she was freed, right? Of course, not believable whatsoever. But I wanted to ask you, Ricardo, about sort of what comes next. So we have this article published today by you. He's been sworn in. In fact, we should mention more than 100 countries sent a delegation. This idea that Maduro is totally isolated and that nobody recognizes the results is also another myth perpetuated by bourgeois media. Of course, he was accompanied, in fact, pretty prominent figures from the region, of course, Diaz-Canel. Daniel Ortega, who rarely leads Nicaragua, was there. We saw leader of the left in Honduras, Mel Zelaya, come as well. I go on and on. Xi Jinping also sent a representative to the inauguration, and we saw, the process play out and very much without incident, and I want to stress that. But the thing I wanted to mention here, which is the second part of this article, which is that the U.S. has levied new sanctions and once again brought up this bounty. It's 25 million, if I'm not mistaken, to information leading to the arrest or conviction of Nicolás Maduro. What do you make of these moves by the U.S. State Department? The outgoing U.S. State Department right now, the Biden White House, has 10 days left of its mandate, 9.5 days left. What do we think about this? Are these going to stick? Do we think we're going to be a strategy? Is Blinken trying to set things up so that Trump's hands are tied when it comes to the Venezuela issue? And of course, we also did hear from Trump on his Truth Media website about Venezuela. Your thoughts, Ricardo?
Yeah, just to pick up on the last thing that Andreina did on how opposition supporters constantly feel defrauded, it's what you were saying, right? This is a group that has constantly proven to be dishonest, but it's also proven to be dishonest to its own supporters, and that's why they always generate these big expectations that the end is near, and they all create this all or nothing feeling, and then they just say, it's not going to be today, but it's going to be soon. And then another important factor that we should bring up, although it will come for discussion later, is that the rest of the opposition, we talk about other prominent figures like Zulia Governor Manuel Rosales, Enrique Capriles. None of these figures even endorse the call to go out to the streets yesterday or even today, because basically they realize that this is pointless and it's just the hardline opposition trying to force an outcome that they clearly cannot, and that's why people like Eric Prince and his associates can launch these very lucrative fundraising campaigns and take the money of the gullible hardline opposition supporters. Doesn't mean that there isn't a threat of these kinds of mercenary operations feeling emboldened, especially now with a higher bounty. But it goes to show that the opposition, the rest of the opposition, wants to do normal politics, and there are other elections coming up later this year to be contested, regional, legislative, and local elections. So to your point, sorry about the preamble. Basically, the Biden administration is, as you were saying, trying to bind its successor as much as possible, trying to make the hot potato a bit hotter if possible. And so what they did today was that they raised the bounty from 15 to 25 million. They also put a 25 million bounty on Diosdado Cabello. I'm not sure if they think that's going to create some sort of rivalry in there. They also created a reward for Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino. They added 8 more officials. I guess they have a list and they figured out who hasn't been sanctioned yet. And they threw in, transport minister, the new president of PDVSA, another head of a police force, and so on. So, they have to be seen to be doing something. And the other part which we threw there, I had missed it and you picked it up, was this extension of temporary protected status. But that's something that Trump can easily repel if he's really going to follow through on his anti-migration policies. So basically the Biden administration, it's not that it never moved away really from the Trump administration's maximum policy. Maybe the Chevron license is really the only exception. And so now it's kind of, on one hand by imposing this president-elect label on Edmundo and then hosting him at the White House, which seemed a bit like a nursing home afternoon tea. And now, these last measures, it's just a way for them to get ammunition to say, here's Trump being soft on strongmen, just like himself. Still a question mark on what Trump is willing to do. Of course, yesterday he was the one who said hundreds of thousands of people had gone out to support Maria Corina Machado, and we replied with the drone footage just to be sure. So that kind of message, plus having people like Rubio could suggest that he'll start on kind of a strong showing, trying to appear very supportive of the hardline opposition. But then, of course, actions are the things that matter. Is he going to withdraw Chevron's license? Is he going to ramp up enforcement of sanctions? Because at the other hand, that also undermines his other objective, which is to look tough on immigration and deport a lot of people. For that, he actually needs some kind of a minimal line of communication with the Maduro government. So we actually have a standing bet here on whether there's going to be a parallel government or not. I still think it's not, because it's such an artificial creation, they can basically declare it whenever they want. It's not like they have to follow any calendar. So I think for now, there's going to be a kind of a wait and see, because it also shows that the opposition is not really on a position of strength, right? So here you had Trump supporting Guaido and then calling him the Beto O'Rourke of Venezuela. Now you look at Edmundo, and Trump's going to say, oh no, this is the Biden of Venezuela. This guy's not going to achieve anything. So of course, in his own logic of what he wants to accomplish.
I want to put a video that he uploaded up on the screen in just a second, but I wanted to highlight this because I thought this was the best comment. He did a lengthy speech following the inauguration. I watched the whole thing, but I wanted to highlight this because I think it really speaks to the dynamics of Venezuela that I think is really always worth emphasizing. And Maduro says, following his inauguration, "I have not been placed as president by the US government or by pro-imperialist governments of the Latin American right. The power I represent belongs to the people. The new presidential term will be one of peace, prosperity, equality, and a new democracy. I swear on our history, on my life, we shall achieve it." And I think that speaks to a bit of the mood. I wanted to bring this here up as well. This is happening right now, basically. This was just uploaded a handful of hours ago. And we see Edmundo Gonzalez now saying, "I am the commander-in-chief, I am the president, and I'm giving you these orders." Really, is there any concern about any kind of rupture in the armed forces? It seems like they're kind of aiming towards that to see if they can provoke a break. In fact, during the mobilizations, I saw Maria Corina Machado talking about how, they got the children to tell the soldiers to not repress, etc. It seems to be that's what they're going for. We see this here on the screen, Edmundo Gonzalez acting as if he's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. What do you make of this? Is there any real danger of that? We know that Vladimir Padrino reaffirmed his commitment to the government, to the Constitution, but, is there that danger? Could that present itself? Anybody want to jump in here?
Sure, I'll go in. It's been 25 years of Bolivarian Revolution, and there was only one time, really, and that was in the coup against Chavez, that the sector of the military, never the basis of the military, never the soldiers, but the upper echelons of the military turned against, in that case, against Chavez and against the people of Venezuela. So I'm not too concerned about that. It's happened over and over and over again. Guaido did it many times. Of course, Maria Corina Machado has done it many times. There's been so many instances of the opposition, of the, like the puppet opposition, which is what we should call it, that being Maria Corina and her acolytes. There's been so many times that they've said this, and they actually seem to hope it. They actually seem to think that it's possible. I think that we will most likely see attempts, mercenary attempts, to come into the Venezuelan territory in the next months and years. I'm almost sure that we are going to see it, and there will be Venezuelans in those attempts, and some of them may even wear the uniforms of the armed forces, but they will be paramilitaries. In other words, they will not be at the orders of. They will not be in the actual army of Venezuela. So I think that when we look at this, I think that one has to be concerned about everything. I'm sure that there's people who are trying to really examine the possibilities, but from my perspective, from my reading, that is not actually a real danger. What is the real danger are initiatives sponsored from outside that may have people who have a Venezuelan cedula but who are living as outside. There are Venezuelan mercenaries fighting in around the world, like as happens in all countries of the global south. There's poor people who end up being mercenaries, and those people will be mobilized to attempt to do things. But we have already seen a rapid response from the Venezuelan government in these recent years, in these recent months, and actually in this last week, as we've already reported, there have been people who have been detained just like 4 days ago, I think. So let's be concerned about that situation. Let's be watching it. The other situation would be not so much of concern to me particularly.
And I really appreciate the point you made about the uniforms, because as we just finished reviewing, right, these are political actors who are very much willing to go through these deceptive acts, right? That they may be willing to try to trick the population and again circulate this idea, oh, there has been a rupture, but in fact is largely driven by other forces, mercenaries, paramilitaries. So it's important, of course. I invite you to follow our social media, follow our website, where we'll be covering this as always with our team on the ground. Ricardo, did you want to jump in on that before I move on to our final thing here? We're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, just something quick. What Cyril was mentioning, we always go back to Operation Gideon, which was led by former Green Beret, a Canadian-born U.S. Green Beret, with a former, a defector, major general from the Venezuelan army, and it had 2 U.S. former Green Berets, and the rest of the force was made up of Venezuelans, most of them army defectors. So I also think, and that goes back to the bounty, it adds an incentive, and especially for people who have this kind of military bravado, who think, the Venezuelan military can be brushed away, as soon as they see a big threat, they'll just fold, when of course all the recent history points, shows differently, and they may try some kind of adventure like Operation Gideon, which ended very quickly and very tragically for the invading force. And as for the army, I agree. That concern is always there, but if it does happen, it's not going to be because of something that Edmundo Gonzalez said on social media. If it was for that, we saw Guaido issuing all sorts of orders, and he, at least to his smallest credit, he was still inside the country. But I'm sure that U.S. intelligence and other agencies will be trying to bribe sectors of the armed forces to see if they can create this rupture. But the evidence so far is that it can hold very solidly. And of course, now the challenge going forward, and this goes to the larger environment of economic sanctions and so on, whether the country can continue in this climate of stability and slow, if unequal, economic recovery that will, kind of push away this sort of instability and the threats that come with it.
All right, we're almost at the end of our broadcast here. I wanted to put here on the screen images. We started this broadcast talking about how the mainstream media often pretends like Chavismo doesn't exist. This video here from Camila Escalante, a journalist who's in Venezuela as well right now, covering this. This is images from Petare in eastern Caracas. There's some images there of folks from the Unión Comunera. We're big fans of their work, of course. And so I wanted to close by talking about Chavismo, about the revolutionary forces, about the juncture that the country finds itself in, having survived these destabilization efforts. We know more is likely going to come down the road, but there is a revolutionary fervor still very much alive and well in Venezuela. And so I wanted to close, and Syria, you can jump in on this. We put this article up just today, Alba Movements and the Bolivarian Revolution, with a conversation with Hernan Vargas. With President Maduro's third term about to begin, we discussed an organizational framework that promotes continental integration from below. And here we have a quote from Hernan Vargas, spokesperson from Alba Movimientos. Talk to us, Xira, about the role of the social movements, how they're reading the situation, and how they intend to operate in the next 6 years now that Maduro has been inaugurated for his third term.
I think that in a perspective from the social movements, this is actually a moment of hope, not only because we ensured the continuity of the Bolivarian Revolution, which is no small thing with all that we have against us. So in that sense, it's obviously important, but it's also a time of hope because we can see over the last few years, and especially over the last year, that there has been a turn towards the communes from the government. So the communes, of course, emerged around 2009 when Chavez began to talk about the project of the communes being, as we say, el camino y el destino, the path and the end goal of socialism in Venezuela. But what we have seen in this past, especially let's focus on the past year, we've seen a real turn towards the communes, and this is actually a tremendous success from the popular movement. I mean, I think that in the worst of times, communes began to become really strong. In the worst of times, when there was nada, when there was nothing, communes began to really self-organize and fight. And that was a time where actually the conditions were really against everything. They were basically, the conditions were against life. And people committed to life many people committed to life by committing to the communes. So, but then we have seen this kind of like coming closer and closer and closer between the government and the communes in these past years. And actually, I wanted to be brief as we close, because I'm sure that Ricardo and Andreina have something to say. But I think that this coming year is going to be a really interesting year, because this coming year, more than a year where there's going to be 3 sets of elections, this year is actually going to be a year where the commune is going to be centered, because we are actually going to have a reform, a constitutional reform. Maduro has already announced it. It's very important because, like, as the communes begin to grow, as the communes begin to operate and transform little by little, too slowly from our perspective, but the metabolism of our society, this actually requires some changes in terms of the constitutional framework. So we can look ahead in this coming year to a reform that will be a process of making proposals, debating, and ultimately voting yes or no to a reform to the constitution. So this is what we are looking forward to this. It is a tremendous challenge for grassroots organizations and for communal organizations, because as extraordinary as they are still incipient. We should recognize that. So we are met with a tremendous challenge, but it's a wonderful challenge. It's one of those challenges that only a revolution can put in front of you.
I want to give a last opportunity for everybody to chime in here, but before we do that, I want to remind everybody to donate to Venezuelanalysis if you're able to. Of course, we have right here in front of us the team that's on the ground, that has been there, that's providing coverage, that's able to break through that media blockade, and that's made possible thanks to support of our viewers, listeners, and readers. So, of course, if you do have the opportunity to support our work, support the work of Andreina, Cira, and Ricardo, who are in Caracas doing this very important job of informing about what's actually happening here, and always with that really critical grassroots perspective, the Chavista grassroots, the Bolivarian grassroots, which I think I'm so encouraged to hear about these constitutional reforms, because they're coming from below, right? They're demanding about what, in terms of what needs to change, and I think that's really, really exciting. So we're just about at the end here. Any final words here in terms of your feelings about what happened this week, today, about what's coming next? I think we'll go with Andreina, and then we'll wrap up with Ricardo.
So I just wanted to say like 3 little things. One is that I think we need to remember that Hugo Chavez worked really hard to dignify the military forces. And he worked really hard to make sure that they were part of the revolution, that they were a key factor of the revolution. And we have to remember the people who belong to the armed forces, they are the people. They are humble people from the barrios. And they were also really affected by the US blockade against Venezuela. So I think when you understand that context, you realize why the military is not just going to suddenly one day say, yeah, I'm going to support Edmundo, I'm going to support Maria Corina Machado, the very people who have hurt me, my family, and my country. So I think that's something that we need to remember, that Chavez worked really hard to dignify the military forces, to make them part of the revolution, and that unity, that civic military unity persists today. Another thing is that Cira is absolutely right, that I think this is like a a really hopeful moment for the Venezuelan Bolivarian Revolution. I think that we are definitely seeing like a new phase, a new era of the revolution in which we're going to see popular movements, especially the communes, the Venezuelan communes. We're going to see them thrive in a way that we saw them thrive before amidst the U.S. blockade, amidst the worst years of the economic aggression, and now we're going to see them thrive in a moment in which Venezuela is slowly recovering economically, and in which the government is giving the communes a very protagonic space. I know I repeat myself a lot, but I wanted to mention something that Palestinian fighter Leila Khaled said when she visited El Panal commune here in Caracas. She was saying that she admired communes because she felt like this is a space where people can make their own decisions, people can protect their children, can protect their economy, they can have a place to live. And it sounds so simple. It sounds like so simple. But this is precisely what the Palestinian people don't have. They don't have a place where they can live in peace, where they can have a peaceful economy, where they can protect their children. We know that thousands of children have been killed by the Israeli genocide in Gaza. So when you hear that, that's when you realize how important communes are to protect the community, to make sure that people are safe, that they have all of their human rights respected, and that they can defend themselves and resist the U.S. imperialist blockade. And yeah, well, I think that was all I had to say, just my final thoughts.
Yeah, just quickly, I think we've covered a lot, and it's not like this is our last opportunity to say things. Just to pick up on, I mean, I'm glad you remember, we sometimes are a bit too modest when it comes to promoting our own work and you know, recalling that it's the reader support that makes it possible. So just this week we published columns, we were on top of news all the time, we were on the ground. We published an interview, we're doing this live stream now, so there's really, and it's just the four of us, so there's really no shortage of ways to stay up to date with developments, and of course we always have our work cut out, but it's something that we relish and enjoy doing. So just a quick word, I mean, just to pick up on what Sira said, I think it's certainly worth highlighting how in the worst of times, popular movements actually refused to surrender and forged the way forward and reinvented themselves and so on. So if we ask, you know, we look at it from far away and we see, oh, here's an economy that contracted by 3/4 in 7 years. Here's a country that's blockaded and has seen its oil revenues plummet. And then you look at where we are now and you ask yourself, you know, how is it possible that the Bolivarian process or even the Maduro government survived? And I'm not saying that this resurgence in grassroots organizing and popular movements is the whole answer, but it's certainly a significant part of the answer. But now, of course, we shouldn't be over-optimistic. Of course, the government has, and the process has bought itself a significant window with which, you know, to do things like a constitutional reform and so on. But it's still a precarious economic situation. It's still very vulnerable to, you know, outside conditions, especially if sanctions get worse. So the challenge, you know, from our perspective and where we see the horizon and how we feel you know, based on the experience, this horizon we can get closer to the horizon rather. It's a matter of, you know, in this economic recovery, seeing these grassroots organizations and communes in particular build up and continue to gain strength so that they become a more prominent actor in the recovery that's economic first of all, but it's not just economic.
And of course, we'll be there to bring you that information. As always, it's been a pleasure to be here, the special live edition of the Venezuelanalysis podcast. We'll be sharing this on our traditional media channels as well. So if you didn't catch this live, we'll make it available for you. Or if you're tuned in a little bit late, you will be able to catch up and hear our very on-the-spot, quick analysis of the week's events. And of course, today, where we saw Maduro inaugurated to begin his third 6-year term. And I like that so many of you said that this is actually a moment of hope. And I think in a time, in a world where there is so much bad news, it's important to try to focus on the things that make us feel hopeful. And if anything, the Bolivarian Revolution has always served to inspire people throughout the world. I know I certainly am. I hope everybody who's joined us today is also feeling inspired. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, of course, to the Venezuelanalysis staff, Ricardo Vaz, Cira Pascual Marquina, and Andrina Chavez. I'm your host, Jose Luis Granado Ceja. We'll see you next time.